Hello, this is Guilherme and I am from Brazil. This is Conversations on Magic and I'm here today with Michael Close. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Guilherme. Nice to be here.
Yes, great. Today I would like to ask you something that I read. I believe it was one of your books. I believe it was The Paradigm Shift. I'm not sure if that was the book.
I think it was.
Yes, yeah. So I actually read the book Fast and Slow because I work with education. And then we have a lot of things that happens when we are learning that are related to that. And then when I read about it in the book, and then when I spoke to you, sometimes you tell me about how people will react to stuff that they are used to, that they are comforted with, that they are used to, and things that are very new to them, and how they will react. Can you talk a little bit about it and the concept and everything else?
Yeah, sure. I trying to remember who suggested to me to read Thinking Fast and Slow. It might have been Penn Jillette of Penn and Teller. And the thing that struck me about the book is that the author is Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize-winning economist. And the thrust of his book, and there's much of his book that I don't understand, but what struck home to me was his idea, well, not his idea, but was his explanation of how the brain works. Because what's real important for magicians, if you want to be a really good magician, is you have to understand how people's brains work, because no magic ever happens out here. It doesn't. There's not a single magical thing that happens when I do a trick. Any magic that happens in the spectators' minds because of how they interpret what they see. So the better you can understand how people think, the better you can structure your tricks to take advantage of any weaknesses that people might have. So in the book, Kahneman explains that the brain works on two systems. He calls them System 1 and System 2. And System 1 is, from the standpoint of evolution, is the oldest part of your brain. And this is the part of the brain that is constantly monitoring your environment and seeing, and it answers simple questions. For example, a simple mathematic or arithmetic question like 2 + 2. Once you've learned that, it doesn't require any energy or any stress or what have you to answer a question like that. So when you're in familiar situations, you can basically maneuver safely just because you understand how the world is around you, and that System 1 part of your brain keeps you functioning properly. System 2 is a more recent evolutionary development, and it looks for things that are out of the ordinary. In other words, if it notices something that doesn't fit into the way the world works as far as System 1 is concerned, then it alerts System 1 and says, what is that? What's going on here? And of course, that's a very smart thing to have in order to have a human species survive over a long period of time, is that, if you hear a rustling in the bushes and that you normally wouldn't hear, you better be careful, because that might be something that's going to eat you. So what happens when we do magic tricks is, because they're basically puzzles, and a lot of people look at them as puzzles, things to be figured out, things to be solved, we are pretty much engaging System 2 when we do magic tricks for somebody, because what we are showing them is, first of all, out of the ordinary, and second, they know we're magicians, and so consequently, they know that the game between a magician and a spectator is, I show you something and you try to figure it out. So that's the sort of the standard way of looking at things. Now, how does that function in terms of how do we fool people then, if this is the way the brain works? Well, There's several things that go on with System 1 and System 2. A very good way to understand System 1 and System 2 is if you're driving in your car and it's a route that you have been on many, many times, and there's very little traffic, and you're very familiar with the roads and what happens, you will make that entire drive with only System 1 functioning. Every now and then, System 2 may notice a pedestrian or a dog or something that you have to be alert about, but basically you'll make that drive on System 1. If I'm in a new city in a rental car and I'm trying to merge onto a busy freeway, that's all going to be System 2, because every bit of my senses has to be aware of what's going on. I have to think about how the car handles. I have to think about the traffic. I have to think about all of that. And that would be a System 2 process. Now, the interesting thing is that System 2 uses energy. System 2 is what I would call in English a resource hog. In other words, it's going to take every bit of every function it can in order to solve whatever problem is going on. So that means that when you make your drive, that's a familiar drive that you've done many times, and you do it all on System 1, when you get home, you'll be fine. I mean, you won't feel tired. You've made the drive. But if you're driving from the hotel to the airport or the airport to your hotel in a new car on a busy freeway, when you get to that hotel, you will be very tired. And you'll be tired because System 2 has been active that entire time. This is why when you take a test for 8 hours, you're exhausted by the end of it, or a 4-hour test, because that's System 2 all the way. So what we want to do when we do magic for people is we need to have System 2 be available, because if you're not understanding the conditions of the effect, then there won't be any magic. But I have to be in control of the times when System 2 jumps in and does what it does. So you have to be very careful about that. One of the things that I have suggested is that a lot of times, especially with close-up magicians who work in restaurants and things like that, the suggestion has always been to start off with a magic trick. Walk up to the table and, the classic one is, hello, did anybody lose this white knife? Oh, it's a black knife. No, it's a white knife. No, it's a red knife. I'm the magician. Well, think about what happens in that situation. So you're at a restaurant, maybe 2 couples, 4 people sitting at the table. It's safe. System 1 is totally in control. You've been to the restaurant before. There's nothing unusual about it. You're talking with people you know, and a stranger walks up to the table and immediately starts doing this stuff. Well, what happens? System 2 comes online and never lets go from that point on. Because who is this guy? Is he a threat? We have no idea who he is. So this is why I've always felt that the best way to handle restaurant magic is to talk first and then do magic. In other words, prove to them I'm harmless. You don't have to worry about me, because then System 2 analyzes and says, he's okay, don't worry about him. And now I can go into my tricks. So there's a much longer chapter on this in the Paradigm Shift book, the first one. And then I've tried to, as I discuss some of the tricks that I talk about in that book, show how you apply that to actually doing, making it work in a trick. Now, one of the ways that sometimes happens is, if all of a sudden I pick up a deck of cards and I'm just doing all kinds of crazy flourishes, and stuff like this, people go, whoa, wait a minute. Whoa, I haven't seen anything like that. That's brand new. I have no idea what this guy's doing. I better keep my eyes on him. But if I shuffle the way normal people shuffle and I don't make a big deal out of it, then you look at that shuffle and you go, well, that's a real shuffle. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, fine. And System 2 doesn't even come into the picture. even though that shuffle I did was not a real shuffle, it was a false shuffle. So that's the kind of thing. You have to remember that people, the greatest thing that human beings do, the thing that's built into us, is pattern recognition. This is the thing that has allowed us to, move out of the caves. Once we understood that the stars and the planets have a cycle of things and we see what that pattern is, then human beings start making things. And we're so good at pattern recognition that we find patterns where there are none. So I'll find a face in the moon, or Elvis in a piece of toast or something like that. We're very good at making patterns. I used to live in Las Vegas, and if you play a slot machine, the things that come up are random, and yet you will look at the pattern of symbols on the reels and you go, oh, look, I almost got that. If that had just, and you start making a pattern out of where no pattern exists at all. So when we do magic for people, you establish a pattern. So, for example, if I'll turn my camera down for a minute so you can see, if I turn over cards from the top of the deck like this, I push them off and I show them and I do that. And all of a sudden I have to do a move at some point in time. So I have to come over here and I do this and I do this and I do that. All of a sudden that pattern that had been established by the way that I handled cards the first few times disappears, just because it looks different than what you'd seen. One of the things I've been talking about with people, I'm sort of in the middle of Fool Us now, and everything's being done, remotely, and so I'm doing lots of Zoom calls and Skype calls and what have you, is that sometimes in a trick, a person will have to stand a certain way. Maybe they need to get something out of the edge of their coat or out of their pocket, and all of a sudden they have to turn their body so that they can get this thing out of their pocket. And that's the only time they've stood like that in the entire routine. Well, as I watch it, it sounds like a bad note on the piano. It sounds like somebody's playing out of tune. I just go, what the heck was that? Because I hadn't seen it before. So if you've got to do that move at some point in the routine, you got to get me prepared for it by doing it early on when it doesn't mean anything. You establish this is how you stand. This is how you hold, you hold yourself. So it's a fascinating subject to me. It has, I think, implications way beyond what I've worked on so far. And I think I've come up with some stuff that's really pretty deceptive, just incorporating the way that System 1 and 2 works. But it's a really interesting subject to me.
I think there was one recommendation you gave me from Elmsley that was on one of his books, perhaps the second book that you recommended, and I think it was the second routine or something like that. I don't remember, but you mentioned, and that situation you mentioned, it's not about the effect itself. It was about to pay attention on the sequence that and how he built his sequence. And it was exactly like that. On the first effect that he built in the routine, I don't remember the name of the routine. I don't know how many effects were in the routine, but there were several. And in the first effect, he already sets up the way he deals. It wasn't the way he deals cards. It was the way he does some kind of movement, or he taps the table, something like that. He taps the table. And then he keeps tapping the table randomly. And it seems random, but 2 tricks from now, that's when he's going to use this movement.
And that's when it's important. And by then, it's, what happens with System 1 and System 2 is that it will talk about education, for example. And I'll use the example of a grandmaster in chess grandmaster. And so much information has been transferred from System 2, the logical analytical part, and becomes second nature to that kind of a great chess player. So that, I was listening to an interview, I think his name is Magnus Carlsen. I think I may have that wrong, but he's the chess grand champion, and certainly a brilliant man. And in this interview, they ask about, how long does it take you to find the right move? And he says, pretty much instantly. But then I have to check to make sure I'm not wrong. So the decision comes from system one. He just sees it. All this information gathers and it's instinctive. And then he has to use system two to double check himself and make sure that he didn't, misinterpret that. But yes, this is a thing that very few magicians that I've encountered understand this importance of. You look at the end of the routine. Is there a critical move where you have to be holding your hands in a certain position or doing something? Well, in that case, I need to go back to the beginning of the routine and find some way to be in that position when it doesn't mean anything, but you get used to seeing it. You get used to seeing it. So yeah, it's one of those magical hints that not a lot of people talk about.
I was looking up the name of the act. It was the Dazzle Act, I think.
Oh, yes.
It's in the collected works.
It's in the second Alex Elmsley, the collected works volume 2.
Yeah.
That Dazzle Act, for anyone who's interested in learning how to routine magic tricks together to make a complete act, with 4 or 5 effects in it. Elmsley, and I was really an idiot, because Elmsley came over to the United States in, I think, 1973, 4, 5, something like that. And he was doing a lecture tour, and the lecture was the Dazzle Act. First, he did the whole act, which lasted, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes maybe. And then the rest of the lecture was explaining everything that went on with that. So Elmsley was going to be in Chicago, Illinois, and I was living in Indianapolis, which was about 3.5 hours away. And I didn't go. I didn't drive up to see this lecture. I mean, and I kicked myself up completely for being dumb. Maybe I didn't have the money. I don't remember what the reason was, but I should have done anything to get up there to see this, because magicians had never seen anything like this. He did a series of 4 or 5 effects. And then the last thing he did was the deck. It was like a recap, a recapitulation, because every card that was chosen shows up again, and everything happens, and magicians were just dumbfounded by it. It was such a beautifully constructed act. So yeah, Elmsley, I highly recommend all of Elmsley's things. I mean, there are some tricks that are more esoteric and perhaps less performable, but his thinking is really important to understand and to sort of internalize.
Great. Yeah, I think it was one of the very first books you presented to me after you showed me. I think it was right after you showed me Tamariz's Mnemonica, the first Mnemonica book, and then I told you that I was more interested in the creation and the connection of everything together, rather than learning a lot of effects themselves. And I would much rather spend my time building something and connecting things together. And I think that's when you recommended this book. But this kind of thing also appeared in the other books from Dai Vernon that you recommended. Also, in the middle of the book, at some points, there are some hints to that style of thinking, I think, as far as I remember.
Well, one of the interesting things, it sort of goes to this point. The thing that Alex Elmsley is best known for is the Elmsley count, and which is a method of counting 4 cards and hiding 1 in the process of it. And the way Elmsley originally did it, or it was originally published, was at the fingertips, like this, to show 4 face down cards and hiding 1 in the process. Well, if you think about it, this is not the most natural way to hold a packet of cards to count them 1 at a time, but this is the grip that Elmsley came up with. So Dai Vernon, a really great magician, what probably the greatest influence on close-up magic of the 20th century, has a trick called twisting the aces, and the Elmsley count is used several times during that routine. And here, what Vernon came up with was this idea. So he had the cards in a normal dealing grip, and then he twisted them. He said, I give them a magic twist, and at the end of the twist, the cards are in the perfect position to do the Elmsley count. So most magicians don't know that's why the trick is called twisting the aces, because Vernon was looking for a way to get the cards in this position naturally so that it wouldn't trigger system 2. Now, that system 1 and 2 is not something that Vernon ever talked about, really, but he knew it instinctively without knowing the scientific basis about it. But, that's the kind of thing. And I think that's what was most interesting to me about learning about this system 1 and system 2, because intuitively, because of the training I've had and the people that I spent time with when I was young, that Vernon influence came to me because my mentor was someone who had spent a lot of time with Vernon. And so I saw things a certain way without understanding why they worked. I knew they worked, but I didn't know why they worked. And now I understand why a lot of these things work. And it's very helpful when you're working on routines to look at these questions.
And then I think there's the traditional connection to the, I always forget the name in English, but the ace that goes up and up and up and 4 times and 10 times, it doesn't matter. How do you call that?
The ambitious card trick?
The ambitious card, yeah. I always forget the word ambitious. And there's always the discussion, okay, if you repeat the effect, you should do it in some different ways and so on. But I think what worries me about repeating, even if it's just the ambitious cards, and even if you're using different methods and so on, is that you are fighting again and again and again with the subject, with the person who is watching, and you're triggering this part of the brain the entire time. There's no rest. It's the entire time that the person is active.
The ambitious card it's an interesting plot because, of course, the magic rule is never repeat a trick for the same audience or immediately repeat a trick for the same audience unless you're using a different method. And the reason for that rule is that once they've seen the trick, now they know what moves that they may have ignored the first time, things that you did. They'll pay more attention to see if some of those things they overlooked may actually have played a part in making the trick happen. So with a good ambitious card routine, you have to be constantly changing up the method that you use to accomplish this. The thing that always bothered me, and I did not develop an ambitious card routine that I personally was satisfied by until around 1999, I guess, when I started to work at the Houdini Lounge in Las Vegas, and I found a hook. I'm not going to discuss it because it's my hook, and I'm not comfortable giving that away just yet. But I figured out a reason why the trick happens. What makes that trick happen? And I figured out a sequence that is so surprising at the beginning that you begin to overwhelm the spectator's system 2. In other words, there's a limit to how much a spectator can absorb on system 2, and then system 2 just gives up. It's just now the interesting thing about system 2 is because it takes all the resources from the body that the body functions, it can shut you down. It is so busy trying to figure out what's going on that movement is impossible, speaking is impossible. you're just there. Now, I just saw that in a very tragic and sad situation with that explosion in Beirut, Lebanon recently, because there was a woman sitting with her grandchildren. I'm not sure if they were on a balcony or looking out a balcony window when this explosion happened, and the windows shattered. They were quite some distance away. Mm-hmm. And she had been playing with the kids and doing this, and this totally unexpected thing happens, and she is paralyzed, motionless, trying to absorb what just happened. She just sits, she doesn't move for 5 or 6 seconds. Just the kids are sort of running around. She should be tending to them, but she can't move. This is why, if you really fool people, you don't get applause. You get this quiet silence because they're really busy trying to figure that out. And that's very satisfying. I mean, but it's fun to get applause and laughs, but I love having people just, they don't know what to do.
Yeah. They don't know where it came from, right? They have no idea. They are so not ready that...
Have you ever been in an earthquake?
Yes, a few times. Probably nothing too big, but yes.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing, because the one thing that's built into System 1 is that the ground doesn't move. And I was in Santa Cruz, California, and there was one. It wasn't a very powerful earthquake, but it did. This was going on, and you are absolutely frozen in place as you try to wrap your head around what you're experiencing, because it's completely against your worldview. So it's an interesting phenomenon, and very valuable for magicians to think about this if they really want to fool people. And I think you have to. I think you have to really want to fool people. I mean, I think it's important for magicians. You can be entertaining, you can have fun, you can have laughs, but if people don't walk away going, I don't think a person should be able to do that, then you've done your job well. Then you've done your job well.
Yeah. And last question connected to that is, it reminds me a little bit about it's not the offbeat, but when you, what I take into my mind right now is when I do my effect, where it's actually not my effect, when I present my father and mother, and then I came out of my father and mother, the moment, the few times that I did it and I appear, well, the effect is mental, so people do not expect me to know who is my father and who is my mother. And when I discover it, they are very happy. So there is this sensation that their effect has ended.
Yes.
So then comes the offbeat. So it's not that I am doing anything tricky now, because the effect has been, not effect, right? Or the entire method has been done already. Everything has been finished. And for them, it was a conclusion already. So they are already satisfied. There's this moment of closeness, right? Everything is closed. And then there's this, oops, but take a look at this thing. And then there's this extra little thing that happens that nobody's waiting. And so I don't know, for me, it feels like a little bit that it's even easier to trick the person because the person is not, I don't know which system is, where the person is at that moment.
I don't know if that works so much on System 1 or System 2. It has an aspect of it, but it falls on our category. Did we talk about assumptions? We did talk about assumptions a little bit, didn't we, last time? If not, it'll be a good topic for one of our conversations.
Okay.
But people bring certain assumptions to a performance, and they don't realize they've made those assumptions. And so one assumption is that when the curtain comes down, the show is over. But maybe there's a little more going on. So there's a natural relaxation, because when you find your mother and father in that card trick, that is a big surprise, because there doesn't seem to be a method that would allow you to do that. And that's quite amazing. And so now System 2 is busy going, well, wait a minute, what did I just see? How in the world could that? And then you have this little extra little climax at the end, this little surprise at the end, which works in this trick particularly well because it's really logical. It's not just something that happens, all of a sudden, here's a giant billiard ball or something. No, it really makes sense in terms of what happens. And the other thing we talked about is it's a very nice extra surprise because the first trick is cerebral. It's an intellect trick. You got to think about it. It isn't things disappearing and appearing and that kind of stuff or changing places. It's a trick that engages your intellect. But your appearance there, when the photo of you shows up in that trick, that's a magical surprise. I mean, that's so different than what came before. It adds to the effectiveness of that particular thing. Yeah.
So there's the assumption, there's the two categories in this categorization of cerebral and visual.
Yeah.
And something else at the middle that I mentioned that I forgot. Great. Yeah, I think that sums up. Yeah, that's pretty much how I feel when they react to that. Yeah. Thanks, Michael. I think for this time that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think I hogged the conversation. I apologize.
No problem. No problem at all.
See you next time.
Thank you. See you.